Eddie, do you get the title? I mean, America's finest, because it's America's finest city. We don't have football.
Right.
I mean, you get it, right?
Yeah.
I want to make sure the people get it.
Oh, no, yeah. It's a shout out to San Diego. We don't have football. And also, eventually, we'll be the best fantasy football podcast.
Eddie, you're incredibly well-read. No one can touch you during fantasy football season or draft season, your expertise. And later, we'll go over some of the hits and misses. I'll call you out on a few things, but praise you as well, because you're really good at this. And, I took some of your advice. Didn't really work out for me, but you say it might in the future. So we'll talk about that. Let's start with one of the big injuries from last week. And actually, there were two injuries on the Packers. And this is near and dear to my heart. My quarterback, my first year of playing the fantasy football, because I don't have real football to really pay attention to on a daily basis here. I'm enjoying the heck out of it. Aaron Rodgers is my quarterback.
Okay.
Jordy Nelson, we don't know where he's going to be, quad injury, I believe. Randall Cobb, shoulder injury. So his two top receivers, fantasy football studs, right? They're out. How does this affect if Aaron Rodgers is your quarterback?
Well, you might want to temper your expectations as much as you can with somebody like Aaron Rodgers. You're talking about one of the top two elite quarterbacks, him and Tom Brady, I would say, in the NFL. When I say temper expectations, do you bench him? No, unless your other guy is Tom Brady, maybe.
In which you had a peculiar draft.
Yeah, I mean, you loaded up on quarterbacks. But no, just, the 30-point week you might expect, especially going against somebody like Cincinnati at home. Maybe he goes for 20. Maybe
I can tell you this, he hasn't had a 30-point week yet. So.
Sure. and you're expecting that, right? You drafted Aaron Rodgers expecting him to go off 4 or 5 touchdowns, in a week. So.
Okay, so with Nelson and Cobb down, what do you do? I mean, we talked about this before. Do you just take who the next go-to guy for Aaron Rodgers would be, or?
Well, Devontae Adams does. I mean, he showed up last week. Nelson went down.
8 receptions, 99 yards, touchdown.
You can't do. I mean, that's not a bad start.
How many people had him?
Yeah, well, enough. I think enough paid off, but not everybody had him in their lineup because he didn't start off very well. Cobb actually played the role in week 1. So Devontae Adams would be a good start, especially if Nelson is out. Other than that, there are plenty of receivers out there, and we can talk about that a little bit later when we get in start and sit, but and add and drop. But there are guys out there that you can roll with as far as flex options are concerned.
Okay. Another thing, and what we do here on the America's Finest Fantasy Football Podcast is, we talk about some stuff that has happened, the news, but we got to play it forward here. And in doing so, we talk about another injury that happened last week, and out 6 to 8 weeks, Carolina Panthers tight end Greg Olsen, fractured his foot.
Right.
What do you do there? There's some decent tight ends available. Right?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's another situation, and we talked about, obviously, David Johnson last week, where it was one of those situations to where an obvious replacement for your fantasy running back is not the replacement for your fantasy running back in real life. So it wasn't on Arizona, so you had to look elsewhere, and we talked about the options for that. This week is the same thing. Ed Dickson doesn't really, set things on fire for me, right?
Like what you're saying is Greg Olsen's out. That's not now Cam Newton's go-to guy, so don't take him.
Yeah, if anything, I think it's going to open up other options in that offense for other people, and we'll once again talk about that later. But as far as tight ends are concerned, there are guys out there that are available that I think would be a good replacement for Greg Olsen. I mean, you're talking about Detroit's Eric Ebron, who had a touchdown on Monday Night Football. He's available in 70% of your ESPN leagues, 35% of Yahoo. Atlanta's Austin Hooper is been picked up in most of the leagues, but he's still available in almost half ESPN leagues. Even the Giants' Evan Ingram, who also scored a touchdown on Monday Night Football, he's barely owned at all. He's only owned in 11% of ESPN leagues and 25%, a quarter of Yahoo leagues. And even Buffalo's Charles Clay is out there. So there are plenty of tight end options.
Should people, as we're on the topic here of options, is the waiver wire where fantasy football is won? I mean, I know, yes, drafting and getting your 2 or 3 studs, right? But now as you're starting to see who the fantasy football studs are, this is here. And is this the time of year that you really should be scouring that wire?
Yeah, you should be honed in. I don't have a problem with getting off to if your waiver wire is depending on if you lost the first 2 weeks, if that's how it's set up. I don't have a problem with getting off to an 0-2 start because we have after week 1, that might have been a fluke. But week 2, now we have kind of an idea what teams are doing. It's getting a little bit clearer. So there are guys out there we're starting to see, you're gonna be an option for your team, and you were, for whatever reason, not paid attention to come draft time. there are always, just like in the real NFL, with the real NFL draft, there are always 40 or 50 players that don't get drafted and end up with jobs the first year. Fantasy football is no different. There are guys that don't get drafted and end up being, superstar worthy that season every year.
Okay. Eddie Brown. If you're looking for Eddie Brown stuff on the Union-Tribune website, you really don't have to look far. Generally, something's posted, boom, right there on the front page under the trending section, right there in the top 5, and at some point, always to number 1. Early in the week, it's Tuesdays.
Yeah, ad drop on Tuesdays, 11 a.m.
That's pre-waiver wire.
Right.
And then start, sit, whatever.
Yeah, whatever
that's Thursday at 11.
Yeah, Thursday at 11. In time for the Thursday night game and set you up for the weekend, too.
You mentioned David Johnson and the fact that, well, maybe you didn't mention this, but you mentioned David Johnson and his replacement, not the way to go. It's pretty much official now, right? Chris Johnson, whose days are past, is now his replacement. Stay away from him. One of the guys you mentioned, if you wanted to pick up, and I took your advice, and I'm not going to come down on you after 1 week. He had a rough week, but Tariq Cohen, the Chicago Bears, 4 points, okay?
Yeah.
It's cool. I still won, but I'm saying, what's going to be the story here with the Chicago Bears rookie going forward?
Well, I think it's what we thought the first week is going to continue. He's going to. They had a tough week in general. The Bears are not necessarily a good team, right? So they're going to have these types of weeks, unfortunately. But one of the things we talked about last week when we made him our biggest ad was the idea that if you own Jordan Howard, you certainly need to pick up Tariq Cohen. And lo and behold, Jordan Howard went out there with a shoulder injury, only had 7 yards on 9 carries, and after the game, left with a sling on his arm, which is never a good sign. And so going forward, Howard might be out. So if you started him last week and you only got 4 points, I apologize. But maybe we can make up for it this week.
So still trust him. And like, I had crap running backs, so that's why I started him. So I mean,
especially in PPR.
You didn't necessarily tell me to, but
right.
I did. Okay, one thing you mentioned to me this week blew my mind, okay? It might be time to consider working a trade for OBJ. Are you pulling like a fire alarm already?
Well, did you watch Monday Night Football?
I certainly did.
Yeah, I mean, that offensive line is horrendous. We talked about it. Eli Manning is, falling down.
Ben McAdoo blamed him.
Which is
the New York paper's on fire today.
Yeah, you don't want to blame your 2-time Super Bowl winning quarterback.
He's a little gun shy back there already, though.
He's jumping at shadows.
It reminded me, and it took Phillip longer than 2 games, but 2012, I believe it was, Phillip, by the end of the year, acknowledged he was a little gun shy because he was getting drilled, and he had the rib problem. You say that you're starting to see that a little bit out of Eli Manning, and that could even make, like, their offense is so bad that even trading OBJ should be on the table.
Well, I think what concerns me is it is that bad, and right now everybody thinks once Beckham comes back, then he's going to fix everything. Well, unless he can, basically play the offensive line and wide receiver, then I don't think he's going to be able to fix much. He's still talented. They're still going to have big games. What I'm concerned with is a couple things. One, they're not going to be consistent. And that's the thing you need in fantasy sports. You're counting on your guys, especially your superstars, especially your first-round picks, to perform every week. You want a low, floor for these guys. The second thing is he's in a contract year. He's already injured. And it concerns me that maybe he's not going to go out there and push himself, especially for a team that if they get off to a bad start and not a playoff team, maybe he's not going to push himself that hard because he doesn't want to hurt his chances of getting his payday.
Okay. Could go the other way, contract year.
Yeah. I mean, that is the hit or miss thing, right?
And what's a bad year for OBJ? I mean, 1,000 yards, which he's never had less than, 1,200?
Yeah. And not double-digit touchdowns. I mean, that's the thing, right?
But you're saying if you can dupe someone, basically, Eddie.
I'm saying if you can get, 100, if you can get $1 for dollar. So if you're lacking in running backs, right? You said you had bad running backs. You picked up Tariq Cohen. If you're lacking running backs and you have somebody like Beckham, then you go out there, you get an elite running back because you can replace receivers much easier than you can running backs in fantasy sports. So if you can get that elite running back, then now it's time to dangle him out there and see what you can get. If you can't, if somebody's offering 50 cents on the dollar, then don't worry about it. Roll with him and just take your chances.
All right. we'll get back to the fantasy news. See, I'm in charge, Eddie, so I'll take the flow of this sucker, if that's okay. But
That's fine.
I'm pretty sure if you wanted to change things, we could. But I want to get into a little topic, and it makes me laugh, these types of things. And you know what? I had a different take maybe when I wasn't a fantasy player, but also I've become, through this Charger situation, a lot more protective of fans. I have. I do think fans cross the line.
Sure.
Especially on Twitter.
Especially on Twitter.
One particular take this week from a player firing back at a fan, Odell Beckham. All right, that's what made me think, and that's why I want to do this now. We'll get back into who Eddie says to start sit and his reasoning, and you can, take that for what it's worth. I take it; it's worth a lot. But let's talk about this. Let's meld fantasy and reality, okay?
Okay.
I've covered this league for a long time. Players generally find it amusing, when fans come up to them on the street. They generally get irritated when fans come at them on Twitter in a, less than nice way.
Sure.
OBJ this week. I forget what the actual tweet was. Maybe you know it, Eddie, but someone was getting after him about getting healthy because he's drafted him, right?
Yeah.
And OBJ tweets back, "No offense, I could care less about your fantasy teams. This is my real life, focusing on getting healthy and getting better one day at a time." You know what? Totally fine with that. One thing that I would caution these players, Eddie, fantasy football, and I know we're not supposed to mention it, but gambling.
Right.
Fantasy football pays your salary. This league is as big as it is because of fantasy football. If people are willing to overlook teams moving, domestic violence, head trauma, older players not being taken care of and dying horrible deaths, it's because they're interested in their fantasy football team. So maybe some respect back to the fan, maybe leaving out the snarky comments like, "I hear you, man.
All right.
I'm trying to get there for both of us." Win-win for OBJ. Comes across as a great guy, lets the guy know, "Hey, dude, I'm working."
Yeah.
As a guy who's immersed, got 4 teams, when these players get snarky, what's your take?
My thought process, look, if anybody comes at you sideways on Twitter, then I understand responding accordingly. But if somebody's just saying, "Hey, Beckham, I got you in my fantasy lineup. I want you to play Monday," he's literally hoping you play, right? So I don't understand why you would be upset and you want to wreck his dream scenario that he's owning a team for once, right? He gets to say. To me, there's nothing to be gained. Like you said. Look, in 2009, there was 29 million fantasy sports players. As of 2015, that skyrocketed up to like 58 million. It's even more now. To me, it mirrored. You talk about the popularity in the NFL. While all this stuff that you just mentioned was going on, it went from being popular to all of a sudden it's the top 29 of 30 shows on television. To me, that's not an accident. If you look at the way fantasy sports and the NFL has gone the last, decade, there's no accident. It's because you're getting better, smarter fans. People are more passionate, and like you said, who are willing to forget all this other ugliness because they're invested too. To me, fantasy sports has always been about we hacked our favorite game and created another game. That's what it is. We took our favorite sport, we created a game to play, and now we're enjoying it. As a player, you want people to follow you. You want people to be invested in you. If you're Beckham, you want somebody to draft you and to follow you the entire year. Why are you hoping for that $100 million contract next year? Because people are following you.
Yeah. I mean, there's estimates, and we talk about the $13 billion in revenue that the NFL has generated. By the way, it was 5-6 years ago, maybe more, but there was a while where the NFL was ignoring fantasy football.
Right.
And then, oh, wow, go to NFL.com now, fantasy football. So that's a part of their revenues. In addition to that, there's estimates that fantasy football, between, entry fees, between, draft parties, magazines, internet, subscriptions, and just going to the site and the advertising that generates, is an $8 to $11 billion industry aside from the NFL. So the secondary market has approaching the primary market in terms of revenue generated. Okay, so
and it's going this way,
guys. You need the fantasy football players.
Yeah.
Golden Tate, loved him. his response to a guy who
Very
was
polite.
disappointed with his performance for the
Right.
Detroit Lions on Monday. Dear Jameson, this is the real world, and the Lions won. That's all that matters. Have a great night. Sincerely, Golden. Look, nothing wrong with that.
Very
Loved it.
polite.
Loved it.
Yeah.
Don't tweet angry either, players. Actually, don't tweet angry ever, anybody. You're going to regret it.
Yeah. There's nothing to, once again, nothing to be gained. I mean, you're on Twitter. If you're somebody who's known in the public life and you're on Twitter, then you're there to build a brand. You're there to interact with people who are following you, to interact with fans, maybe if you're an entertainer or an athlete. There's nothing to be gained by being angry and mean. Nothing.
I've learned that the hard way. Not that I'm at that level, but there's a certain amount of notoriety that comes with the position.
Sure.
And I've regretted things that I've said and realized
And you can't take it back.
you can't take it back. Actually,
They're
I'm
out there
surprised
forever.
players and celebrities don't get in trouble more. It's basically a late night drunk text to everyone.
Yeah.
That's what tweet is.
Exactly.
If you do it.
Exactly.
Late
That's
night
a,
drunk,
that's a
which I
great
never did.
analogy. No, of course
Okay.
not.
Except to you, Eddie. All right, let's not go any further before your big ad of the week. And it's some guy named Chris Carson.
Yes.
Tell me why the Seattle running back is your guy.
Okay, so he's been on the map since preseason, week one against the Chargers, where he basically, fireman carried one of the Chargers' defensive linemen into the end zone from the 2-yard line. Kid's a pure power back. Like you mentioned, I do the NFL draft as well. I remember the kid from the countless months that we spend doing that, and 5'11", 220, pure power back, fits the Seahawks offense perfectly. If you remember Marshawn Lynch, beast mode.
I do remember.
There's a guy that they were pretty successful with. He's been clearly the best running back in that camp since preseason. People have been hyping him since then. It's just about would he get the opportunity. He ran for 90 yards last week, had 100 yards total, and was a big part of their victory over the Niners. I think he's getting that opportunity now. Nobody else is really competing against him.
And in that offense, I mean, that's when they're at their best.
Exactly.
When there's this guy doing that, and Pete Carroll knows that.
Yeah, and beauty, God bless Pete Carroll's heart, is he's one of the few coaches in the NFL who does not like running back by committees, and if he gives Carson the job, which, like I said, it appears he has the gig, then he's going to keep the job.
So if you go to your waiver wire, the who's available, and he's there, and by the way, Chris Carson should be, because at last check, available in 90% of ESPN leagues.
90% of ESPN leagues, over half of Yahoo leagues. So he's still out there. So people, even though, like I said, we've been hyping him since the preseason, I think people are like, well, give Eddie Lacy a chance. Oh, we'll give Thomas Rawls a chance. Well, those guys are either hurt or inept, and they're not doing a good job. Chris Carson has been good since he landed in Seattle.
I love your Chris Carson. Let's go over a couple more. One that really intrigued me, this list of potential ads that you gave me. Jermaine Kearse, wide receiver for the Jets. And it goes against one of your general rules, I think, of stay away from guys on bad offenses, except in the case of a guy like Jermaine Kearse.
Yeah, and also sometimes you can go from a bad offense to a really, really bad offense to where it's almost like, well, somebody has to do something. Right? Somebody has to perform. You can't have a team that they're not going to score 0 points every week. Somebody's going to score. Well, especially teams who can't run the ball and who are bad offensively, they're going to throw the ball a lot. They went out, traded for this guy before the season started, so that means obviously they weren't impressed with the receivers that they had in camp. He's come out the first 2 weeks and been, by all accounts, their best receiver, number-wise, performance-wise, scored 2 touchdowns against the Raiders. So what I see there is, especially in PPR leagues, I mean, he's a flex option right out of the gate. In PPR leagues, he's going to catch his number of balls each week. Is he going to score 2 touchdowns every week? No. But is he going to be the number 1 target when they get down there? Probably. And what you want is opportunity, and what you want is somebody on a keep. So if you're trading Odell Beckham this week, go and get a guy like Jermaine Kearse. Yeah, he's not Beckham, but does he finish with 1,000 yards and maybe 8 touchdowns? Yeah. And is that good production? Yes, it is. And it's cheap, too, because you got him on the waiver wire.
So another waiver wire pickup. Let's stick with wide receivers. And you mentioned it earlier, Greg Olsen out 6 to 8 weeks with the broken foot for the Panthers. And so don't go to his backup at tight end. But Cam Newton now has to find other guys for those targets. Guy on their offense, wide receiver, Devin Funchess.
Yeah,
completely available, basically everywhere.
Everywhere. I mean, he's I think owned in 6% of ESPN leagues right now, 13% of Yahoo leagues. This is kind of a post-hype special. Sometimes we get a kid coming out of college. You're like, oh, this kid, he was, big star at Michigan. Was going to come in and be another big target for Cam Newton. First 2 years, 3 years doesn't really pan out. And then all of a sudden he kind of gets it. Sometimes it takes longer for some of these players to find their way. This is probably his best and last opportunity to become something more than what he is. Like I said, Ed Dixon's not all of a sudden going to be Greg Olsen in that offense. So it's definitely one of those situations where I think he'll see more targets. The next 2 weeks, they're playing the Saints and the Patriots, so they're going to have to pass the ball. We'll see if this is a worthy ad 3 weeks from now.
This is the kind of guy who makes me think of, be it in conversations with you in past years, my friends who played fantasy football, or, what I was most familiar with was the league. Watching that, that's how I knew fantasy football. So, like I said, first year in for me. But the Devin Funchess pickup is the kind of pickup that could put you over the top. This is the kind of pickup that could win you, or the curse pickup is the one that could. The Tariq Cohen. I mean, these are, where people are like, and you are the one who are going to be the beneficiary of his whatever, 7 points, 10 points a week.
Right. I mean, somebody has to fill in that space. And
because eventually Des Bryant's going to get hurt maybe, or, I don't like to ever say that. I don't like to ever give a specific, but one of your stars is going to get hurt.
Right, or like
a bye week win,
like we've already talked about. Like you're gonna have depth in one position, and you're gonna want to take advantage of that depth. You're gonna realize, hey, I'm insufficient at quarterback, so I need to go get a quarterback, or I don't have as many running backs as I need, so I have 3 really great receivers, so I need to trade those guys. Every time I trade a big player off my team, I am always looking to replenish that depth through the waiver wire.
Let's talk one more potential ad. And by the way, the Eddie Brown's full list, and I'm positive it's trending on the front page of the Union-Tribune website, but your full list is there. It posts Tuesdays in advance of the waiver wire, but you can still make waiver moves. Maybe everybody else in your league was sleeping. But before we get to drops, let's go one more, because on the topic of Greg Olsen, who a lot of people had, or a significant number of people had, maybe you're in need of a tight end now.
Sure.
Evan Ingram. Now, Giants offense bad, but Evan Ingram a possible pickup. Why?
Well, because he's an extra receiver. I mean, if you watch Monday Night Football, he looks like he doesn't even look like a tight end. I mean, if you watched him during the combine and Ole Miss, in college,
he's not a tight end yet.
No. I mean, he runs like a 4.3 40 or something ridiculous like that, and has really great hands and makes plays like a wide receiver. Doesn't really block either, so he is a wide receiver essentially. But he's dynamic, and they need weapons. And they need to throw, because of the offense, they need to throw close to the line of scrimmage, and so to get the ball out. He's the type of guy that can, take a 5-yard, pass in the middle and turn it into a 70-yard touchdown. He's like Beckham, and Beckham's he's still limited. And Brandon Marshall's looking like he's forgotten completely how to catch the football. And so Manning is, the only way to fix this offensive line issue is to just get the ball out of his hands quicker. They obviously can't run the ball. They're going to be throwing the ball. So, take a chance on him. I mean, like I said, I like his upside more than somebody like Ed Dixon's.
A couple big drops here. I think it goes without saying that you were down on Eli Manning. I'm going to take that as a drop. Like, if you have Eli Manning.
Just because you probably waited and to draft a quarterback late, and you're like, Eli Manning, all those weapons, oh my God. It's one of those things to where, once again, can't trust him week in and week out. He's going to have big games. He'll throw for 4 touchdowns. He might do it this week against Philadelphia. I mean, they need a win. All the pressure, the coaches, how New York, how it works out. As soon as the pressure gets on, usually you step up or you don't. So he might do that, and everybody would be cool with him. But then he'll go out and throw 3 interceptions the next week and get sacked 7 times too. You don't want that on leading your fantasy team.
Is the Adrian Peterson experiment over if he was on your fantasy team?
He looks woefully mismatched for that offense. He just doesn't seem.
Does he look 31 maybe?
That too.
Okay.
But at this point, I'm going back just because I remember the fond years so well, So like I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. I'm thinking he just does not fit that offense. He's not getting the opportunities. So at this point, why risk it?
Eddie, I dropped Jordan Matthews. What do you say to that? the Bills wide receiver.
No, he's not. What is he at? Like 6
He's who
targets?
I dropped to get Tariq Cohen.
Okay, then that's solid. Right now, he's the fourth option on a team that doesn't throw the ball. So, and he's a wide receiver, so that's not a good.
But he
thing.
was a guy who was in a lot of leagues. I mean, right? I mean,
yeah, he came over from Philadelphia.
Got him
he was going to be the number
right.
one option. He was kind of banged up a little bit
Chest,
in the preseason. It's one of those things to where you would think at best he played a lot of slot in Philadelphia. Out here, he's going to be the outside guy. That hasn't really panned out, and the rookie that they got, Zay Jones, he's kind of the slot guy. But like I said, they throw the ball to LaShawn McCoy more than they throw to their wide receivers. So, I mean, they've only attempted 53 passes in the first 2 games, and only 6 of those went to Matthews.
And it's not like if Phillip Rivers were the quarterback and that's going to change. That's not changing in Buffalo.
No, this is what Buffalo is.
And that's what you're
saying.
saying.
They are who we thought they were.
That's what you're saying. There's a lot of calls you can make after 2 weeks.
Yes.
Got it. All right, Eddie, week 3, start and sit. Little preview here if someone's listening to this before Thursday at 11 o'clock when it posts online,
right.
Union-Tribune.com. And let's start off with a question that came from Facebook. Derrick Henry or Darren Sproles this week?
Definitely Derrick Henry. In fact, he's one of the guys that we were going to preview anyway. So I'm glad you guys are out there asking these questions.
Spooky.
He's at home. He's versus the Seahawks run defense who was gashed by the Niners at home for over 150 yards. DeMarco Murray is dealing with hamstring issues. All preseason long, I'm predicting the fall of DeMarco Murray and that this offense is going to fall into Derrick Henry's hands. They're outside of Dallas, probably the best offensive line, probably the best run game in the league. Bona fide superstar if he gets the carries. He got the carries last week. He ended up with like 87 of his 92 yards in the second half once Murray went down and a touchdown. I think he's an absolute steal, especially when you got him, and that he's a great start this week.
The Sunday night game this week, if we're talking real football, I think that the Raiders go in there and they beat Washington. And I'm not saying Washington's that great a team, but it is on the road. There is
right.
some weapons that Washington has. And when the Raiders do that, oh my gosh, the national media is going to go absolutely nuts on the Raiders. But talking fantasy, one of your starts, a suggestion is Jamison Crowder.
Yeah, somebody who once a lot of the receivers left, Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon left in the offseason. Somebody that you already, if you were in PPR leagues, already knew who he was, but kind of expected to take a jump this year. Hasn't so far. It seems like the Redskins, for a team that has had the same coach and the same quarterback, for whatever, it seems like they've forgotten their offense, which is kind of strange. I believe that's going to change this week at home.
You're looking at the matchup.
Yeah, I'm looking at the matchup. The one place that the Raiders are a little susceptible is in their secondary.
They were last year. They are this year.
Exactly, and that's probably their one weakness going forward in real football. They're 20th against wide receivers in fantasy through 2 weeks, and if the Redskins are going to make any hay, it's probably going to do it through the air.
Okay, one of your sits. This is like whoa. Whoa! And I know it's dependent
Sure.
on who you have.
Right.
But Drew Brees on the road against the Panthers. Talk to me, Eddie.
Once again, if you don't have a solid backup,
If Deshaun Kaiser.
Yeah, if you have Deshaun Kaiser
Go ahead and chance it on Drew Brees.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Take your chance. He has a track record you should probably follow. But what I don't like, on the road, not quite the same Drew Brees historically. Against the Panthers, now, mind you, it's the 49ers and the Buffalo Bills offenses that they played against, but with the return of a healthy Luke Kuechly, they look good. They look really good. They look as good as they were 2 years ago. They have a history also against Brees, so they're second already against quarterbacks in fantasy. There's some things pointing in like, now, mind you, it's rare that Brees completely, has a horrific game.
Right.
But if you have somebody else, if you have an Alex Smith, if you have, another guy that is, has a solid matchup, you might want to consider. You might want to be sneaky. You might want to consider him this week.
Huge cojones to sit a Drew Brees in that you never know, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he's fully capable of
going against
yards,
any.
right?
Yeah, I mean, if you draft a guy like that, you're
Right.
expecting him to start every week.
Have you ever done that and had it pay off where you're like, or have you ever had done it and it just was like, oh, that was terrible that I sat Tom Brady that day.
Yeah, well, yes. Never Tom Brady, but
Come on, Kevin, don't be an idiot.
No. It's just, Tom Brady's probably the one guy I probably would just start against. If there was like an alien force that came down to play football and
Don't
we had
even
to
have
pick,
a second quarterback.
Yeah, no, you just go with him, just because he just tends to win all the time. But no, yes, definitely. There's plenty of times where I've gotten. Sometimes I call it too cute. So edge on the side. if you feel like I drafted Drew Brees, I'm playing Drew Brees. I'm not listening to this Eddie Brown guy.
You get
it. Yeah,
You're just throwing it out there for
I'm
consideration.
just saying there's some things that are concerning.
Right.
That's it. But yeah, totally. Sometimes you get too cute and you try to outsmart yourself and it doesn't work out. Sometimes you do and you feel like a genius.
So let's use this next. You've got a couple sits and they're from the same game.
Mm-hmm.
So basically you're saying stay away from any running back in this game. And then we'll talk about some other matchups that you say stay away from or maybe, really go for.
Sure.
But you say, see, the Bills are hosting the Broncos. Don't start LaShawn McCoy of the Bills, and do not start C.J. Anderson of the Broncos.
Once again, if you have LaShawn McCoy, it's going to be hard to be benching him this week. But mind you, you're probably disappointed in him last week if you had him. I mean, he only had 9 yards and like 12 carries. He wasn't very productive. I had Ezekiel Elliott in like 2 of my leagues last week. I was completely disappointed. In fact, I lost one of my matchups simply because he had almost nothing. I mean, if he would have just had anything, I would have won. And you think you're getting something out of Ezekiel Elliott. You got absolutely nothing. These are two defenses that are absolutely dynamite against the run. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I think it's going to mimic the Carolina-Buffalo matchup last week. There wasn't anything. I mean, it was a fantasy, wasteland.
Yeah.
So, once again, if you have depth at the position, then maybe this is the week you sit LaShawn McCoy. I'm a little on C.J. Anderson. I'm a little C.J. Anderson's probably not one of your top. He might be a top 2 back. He might be your second back. He wasn't your first back probably. So you might be an easier decision with C.J.
But what you're saying is that, look, not only is it C.J. Anderson, who you might not start anyway, but the Bills' strength, or the strength, is their rush defense.
Yes. And probably going forward, it's going to be good to probably stay away from them.
Okay. You also say to stay away from Cleveland, Indianapolis. I don't think that we even need to go into why you would stay away from that in fantasy. People might be like, well, I don't even, do they have players that, people drafted? Yeah. Besides Andrew Luck, who won't be playing for like another month at least. Games that you say possibly you're going to go against your rule, Seti, which is a rule that you have. And again, when we say rules, general rules, guidelines, right?
Sure.
Stay away from Thursday games and stay away from London games. Okay, I think it's pretty self-explanatory why you might say that. And last week we went over the Thursday. This week's Thursday matchup, at first glance, you'd say, well, yeah, I'm staying away from Rams and 49ers at this point any day of the week that they play. Yeah. But then you bring up something, especially for a guy like me whose defense is the Houston Texans going against Tom Brady and the Patriots. I got to sit the Texans defense. They're struggling right now, and except for when they play Cincinnati. And I got to. So maybe I'm looking for another defense, and you say, this Thursday game.
Yeah. The one asset I would consider in Thursday night this week would be the 49ers defense. They looked exceptional going up against Seattle. In Seattle, it looks like to be the strength of the 49ers. It's a short week against Jared Goff. That sounds good to me. That sounds like it's worth investing. It's at home against the Rams, which is the only team the 49ers beat last year. So, I mean, they're once again, like we were talking about, there were concerns with Breeze. These are some things that look extremely kind of positive for the 49ers. Once again, I said normally I stay away from Thursday nights. Outside of running backs, just because it's easier for them to match up and to prepare on a short notice. But this week, Niners defense would be a good streaming option, especially if you have a bad matchup against a really great offense.
Another one of your rules, London. Okay, real wary of that, let's say. And here comes the first one. We've got Ravens-Jags, 6:30 a.m. Pacific on Sunday. And you like maybe, and tell me what it would take for you to start Javorius Allen of the Ravens.
Well, the reason I stay away from London is because, once again, preparation is different. Anytime you change these guys' weeks, I mean, they get into a schedule that they need to keep, basically going from week to week. And so
that's the Ravens insulted the Queen.
Oh, really?
That can't be good. Did you see that?
No.
They put up a tweet where a picture of the Queen, and she had a raven painted across her face. It's since been deleted. I don't think you do that to the queen. I'm just saying bad queen karma, but go on, Eddie.
You never want that. You never want bad queen karma. So that's something else you got to consider. It's one of those things to where, everyththing's different. The travel, who knows, right? And also the matchup, Baltimore and Jacksonville is not necessarily that exciting. But Javorius Allen, somebody that I've been on for the last 2 weeks, he had a really good week last week. He looks like he's becoming the main back. He supplanted Terrence West, going up against a Jacksonville defense that shined in the first week but gave up 197 yards on the ground and 3 touchdowns last week. So if that defense is jet lagged, Allen might be a good play.
And by the way, as we wrap it up here on America's Finest Fantasy Football Podcast, Eddie Brown, Kevin Acee, I want to just endorse a little bit. You said sit the Jags defense. I think they were coming off like a 27-point outing against the Texans.
Yes, they were.
And you said to sit them last week, and that worked out well.
Yeah. I mean, they're very talented, but they're also very young, so consistency is not something that young players tend to get. And I didn't really like the matchup against Tennessee, especially on the road, and it looked right.
So then they start in sits, which do so incredibly well online, and what's why people should listen to the AFFF podcast. Do you do a lot of tinkering with your lineup week to week, Eddie? Like Jaquiz Rogers, was he not in your lineup, but you put him in, or would you? I mean, do you do that week to week?
It really depends on the makeup of the team as we get further into the season. Yes, because you have injuries and you have different things that come up. But initially, the first couple of weeks, you drafted a team, you kind of had an idea who your starters are, so you want to leave them in and not really play the matchups. But yeah, sometimes you see a matchup that's just too good to pass on, or something that's bad, and it's just like, well, I gotta do something different here.
So I don't do that. No one's perfect, Eddie. Okay, so don't beat yourself up. I don't want to see that. Okay,
I try not to.
There's one thing that you said last week, and that was stay away from the Thursday matchup, and especially when you're talking about the struggling Cardinals offense. And then you said to start Larry Fitzgerald. I get it, Larry Fitzgerald, for goodness sake, and you even said that it would be hard to sit him. Okay, so that didn't work out so well for you. And another one, and I don't know that anyone, you said, sit Trevor Siemian. I don't know that anyone would say start Trevor Siemian against the Cowboys.
Right.
But now Trevor Siemian looking pretty good. Got that genius Mike McCoy calling the plays there in Denver. So rather than dwell on your mistakes, Eddie, let's just say, so do you change your thought on Trevor Siemian now? Or no, you know what? Let's wait week to week on this guy.
He's earned the right for me to go week to week on him,
rather than ignore him.
Right now, it's basically each week I'm like, don't start Trevor Siemian. Now I'm like, well, is he going against Cleveland? Is he going against? Is he a good streaming option? Because maybe you got Drew Brees and he's going against the Carolina defense. I don't know. He's worth consideration now. He's earned that much.
You know what I'm going to be tempted to do, like when I have a matchup like that, could be this week when I've got Aaron Rodgers, is like start a guy like Trevor Siemian, have my opponent, checking me out, going, what an idiot, and then you win. I like to win big. That's my problem with gambling. It's like, I don't care about winning. I want to win big in some weird way.
Yeah.
That would be awesome if someone started Trevor Siemian.
It's like I beat you with Trevor Siemian. Part of fantasy sports is, holding something over somebody else's head. So it's like forever you could be like, hey, remember that one week I beat you with Trevor Siemian? Yeah, you have that for life.
Awesome. Eddie Brown, thanks a lot. I learned a lot. Hope you guys did too. America's Finest Fantasy Football Podcast. The reason I'm saying at the end, I didn't screw it up once today. All that alliteration.
No, it's impressive every time you say it.
See you next week.
Take care.